In the fading light of a Tuesday evening, when most people were heading home to their families, Sarah Matthews stood at pump number 7, watching the numbers tick upward with growing dread. The gas gauge on her 12-year-old sedan had been flirting with empty for 2 days, but she'd been stretching every dollar until payday. Now, with her children waiting at her mother's house after school, she had no choice but to fill up. $20, she whispered to herself, a silent prayer that it would be enough to last until Friday. The Atlanta summer heat pressed down, making the simple act of standing there exhausting. Sarah glanced at her watch. She was already running late. Her mother had been watching the kids more often lately, ever since Sarah had taken on a second job cleaning offices at night. As she stood there, one hand on the pump and the other wiping sweat from her brow, Sarah didn't notice the large SUV that pulled up to the pump across from her. She was too busy doing mental calculations, figuring out what else she could cut from this month's already tight budget. The electricity bill was overdue, Jaden needed new shoes for school, and Sophia's asthma medication hadn't been fully covered by insurance this time. When the numbers on the pump hit exactly $20, Sarah replaced the nozzle and turned to head inside to pay. That's when she felt the first tear slide down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, embarrassed, even though no one was watching. Or so she thought. Life hadn't always been this difficult. Before her husband's accident 2 years ago, they'd been comfortable. Not wealthy, but stable. Now, as a single mother of 2, every day felt like walking a tightrope without a safety net. Today had been particularly hard after receiving a notice that her rent would increase next month. Inside the convenience store, Sarah reached for her wallet, the worn leather a testament to years of use. She counted out the $20 in 5s and 1s, some of it tip money from her waitressing job. The cashier, a young man with kind eyes, seemed to sense her distress. "Rough day?" he asked gently as he took her money. Sarah managed to smile. "Just one of those weeks," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. But as she turned to leave, another tear escaped, then another, until she was standing there, one hand covering her mouth, trying desperately to regain composure. She didn't see the tall figure enter the store behind her, didn't notice how he paused, observing the scene with thoughtful eyes. Shaquille O'Neal, former NBA superstar and now successful businessman and sports analyst, had stopped for gas on his way to an event. He wasn't wearing anything flashy, just jeans and a simple button-up shirt that did little to disguise his 7'1" frame. Shaq had grown up knowing financial hardship himself. Raised by a strong single mother and later a stepfather, he understood the weight of responsibility on one person's shoulders. He'd made it his mission to give back whenever possible, though many of his acts of kindness never made headlines by his own choice. As Sarah fumbled with her wallet, trying to put it back in her purse while wiping away tears, she accidentally dropped a small photo. It fluttered to the ground, a school picture of 2 smiling children. Before she could bend down, a massive hand had already retrieved it. "I believe this is yours, ma'am," came a deep, gentle voice. Sarah looked up, way up, into the face of someone she recognized instantly. For a moment, she was too surprised to speak, too embarrassed about her tears, too overwhelmed by the day's events to process the surreal nature of this encounter. "Thank you," she managed, taking the photo and quickly tucking it away. Shaq nodded, his eyes taking in her worn shoes, the name tag still pinned to her shirt from her day job, the exhaustion etched across her face. "Those your kids?" he asked, his voice conversational, friendly, without being intrusive. "Yes," Sarah replied, a natural smile breaking through her tears. "Jaden's 8 and Sophia's 6. "Beautiful family," Shaq said, and then, after a moment's pause, "You know, my mom raised me by herself for a while. Toughest person I've ever known." The simple acknowledgement, the recognition of her struggle without pity, made something shift inside Sarah. She stood a little straighter, wiped her eyes one final time. "Thank you," she said again, this time with more strength in her voice. As she turned to leave, Shaq spoke to the cashier, his voice low, but not so quiet that Sarah couldn't hear. "I'd like to pay for whatever else the lady needs today." Sarah paused, turning back in surprise. "Oh, that's very kind, but I'm okay, really." "I insist," Shaq said, his smile genuine. "Consider it payment for brightening my day with that picture of your beautiful kids." There was something in his manner, a dignity and respect, that made it impossible to refuse without insulting the spirit of the gesture. Sarah felt a knot in her throat. "Maybe just some milk and bread," she conceded, but Shaq was already motioning toward the store shelves. "Take your time. Get what you need." As Sarah hesitantly selected necessities, milk, bread, some fruit for the kids' lunches, chicken for dinner, she could hear Shaq chatting with the cashier and other customers who'd begun to recognize him. There was no fanfare to his presence, no entourage, just a man who happened to be famous but carried himself with the humility of someone who remembered where he came from. When Sarah returned to the counter with her modest selections, Shaq was finishing up paying for his own gas. He turned to her with that same warm smile. "That all you need?" he asked, in a way that conveyed genuine concern rather than impatience. Sarah nodded, still uncomfortable with accepting help, but overwhelmed by the kindness of this unexpected encounter. As the cashier rang up her items, Shaq leaned down slightly. "You know," he said quietly, "everyone needs a helping hand sometimes, even the strongest people." Something about his words, the sincerity behind them, broke through the wall Sarah had built around herself. The one that said she had to handle everything alone, that accepting help was a sign of failure. Fresh tears welled in her eyes, but these were different, a release of pressure that had been building for too long. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means today of all days." Shaq simply nodded, understanding in his eyes. But what Sarah didn't know was that his gesture was far from finished. As they walked out to the parking lot together, neither was aware that this chance meeting at a gas station would change not just Sarah's evening, but the course of her family's future. The parking lot shimmered with heat as Sarah walked toward her car, plastic bags hanging from her wrists. The simple act of having food for her children's dinner tonight had lifted an invisible weight, if only temporarily. She was about to thank Shaquille O'Neal again when she noticed him studying her car with a concerned expression. "That tire's pretty worn down," he commented, pointing to the rear passenger side where the tread was visibly thin, almost bald in spots. "The others don't look much better." Sarah sighed, setting her groceries down on the trunk. "I know, it's on my list, but—" She trailed off, not needing to finish the sentence. They both knew what the list meant, that never-ending inventory of things that needed fixing, replacing, or attention that always exceeded the resources available. Shaq nodded, understanding etched in his face. He'd seen that same look of resignation on his mother's face years ago. Back then, she'd worked multiple jobs to provide for him and his siblings, often putting her own needs last. Now, despite his success, those memories remained vivid, a driving force behind his philanthropy. "Mind if I ask what you do for work?" he asked, his tone conversational rather than intrusive. "I'm a receptionist at a dental office during the day," Sarah replied, "and I clean office buildings 3 nights a week." Pride crept into her voice despite her exhaustion. "My daughter has asthma, so we need the health insurance from the day job." Shaq leaned against his SUV, crossing his arms thoughtfully. 2 jobs and raising kids alone. That's impressive. His words weren't empty flattery. They carried genuine respect. Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time, validation that her struggles mattered, that her efforts were seen. "Some days are harder than others," she admitted. "Today the school called. Jaden needs new basketball shoes. His are falling apart, and they won't let him participate in gym without proper footwear." She smiled ruefully. "He loves basketball, watches all your old games on YouTube." A spark lit in Shaq's eyes. "Basketball shoes, huh?" He seemed to be considering something. "You know, I might be able to help with that." Sarah immediately tensed. The groceries were one thing, a small kindness from a stranger who happened to be famous, but she had her pride. "That's very kind, but we'll manage," she said firmly. Shaq raised his hands in a gesture of understanding. "I respect that, but I have a proposition that might work for both of us." He pulled out his phone. "I'm hosting a youth basketball camp next weekend. We always need volunteers, parents to help with registration, water stations, that kind of thing. It's paid, and all volunteers get a package that includes shoes." He looked up at her. "Think you and your son might be interested?" The offer was presented with such tact, not charity, but an opportunity. a fair exchange that preserved her dignity while meeting a need. That would be wonderful, Sarah said, her voice catching. Jaden would be over the moon. Shaq smiled, typing something into his phone. Great. What's your number? I'll have my assistant text you the details. As Sarah recited her number, a thought occurred to her. Wait, how did you know? She asked. That today was so difficult? Shaq's expression softened. I didn't, but my mama always said God puts people in the right place at the right time. He paused, looking out across the gas station. When I was 9, our apartment burned down. Lost everything. A local sheriff stepped in, helped us get back on our feet. Never forgot that. He turned back to Sarah, his gaze direct but gentle. When I saw you crying, I remembered my mother doing the same thing, trying to hide her tears when things got tough. He shrugged those massive shoulders. Some people look away. I can't. The simplicity of his explanation struck Sarah deeply. There was no savior complex, no desire for recognition, just one human recognizing the struggle of another and choosing to act. As they talked, a small crowd had begun to gather at a distance, people recognizing the basketball legend and nudging each other, taking discreet photos. Shaq seemed to notice but didn't acknowledge them, keeping his focus entirely on Sarah. Those tires, though, he said, returning to his earlier observation. They're not safe, especially with kids in the car. Before Sarah could protest, he held up a hand. I have a friend who owns a tire shop about 2 miles from here. He pulled out a business card and scribbled something on the back. Go see Mike tomorrow. Tell him I sent you for the friends and family discount. Sarah took the card, reading the note he'd written. Mike, take care of her. She's good people. Shaq. I can't, she began. You can, Shaq interrupted gently, and you will, because those kids need their mom to be safe on the road. There was something about the way he said it, firm but compassionate, that broke through Sarah's resistance. She'd been so focused on providing for her children's needs that she'd neglected safety concerns she couldn't afford to address. Thank you, she said simply, tucking the card into her pocket. Shaq nodded, then reached into his wallet and pulled out several more bills. One more thing. Here's an advance on that volunteer work for next weekend. Sarah began to shake her head, but Shaq continued. My business manager would be furious if I didn't handle the paperwork properly. Consider it a contractual obligation. The way he framed it, as a business transaction rather than charity, allowed Sarah to accept without feeling diminished. She took the money with steady hands, her earlier tears replaced by a growing sense of determination. I won't forget this, she said quietly. Neither will I, Shaq replied with a genuine smile. Now, you should probably get those groceries home before the ice cream melts. Sarah laughed, suddenly realizing she'd been so overwhelmed she hadn't even noticed she'd picked up a small container of ice cream, a rare treat for her children. As she loaded her groceries into the car, Shaq stepped forward and handed her a small card with his personal assistant's information. If you need anything else, or if Mike gives you any trouble about those tires, call this number, he said, and bring your kids to that basketball camp. I'd like to meet the YouTube basketball scholar. Sarah nodded, unable to form words around the lump in her throat. As she got into her car, she caught sight of herself in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at her wasn't just a struggling single mother anymore. She was someone who had been seen, really seen, by another human being who recognized her worth beyond her circumstances. As she pulled away from the gas station, Sarah glanced back to see Shaq, already surrounded by fans seeking photos and autographs. But for a brief moment, he looked up and gave her a small nod, an acknowledgement that their encounter, though brief, had mattered. The next morning dawned with unusual clarity for Sarah. She'd slept better than she had in months, the constant knot of anxiety in her stomach temporarily loosened by the previous day's unexpected events. As she prepared breakfast for Jaden and Sophia, her mind kept returning to the surreal encounter with Shaquille O'Neal. The money he'd given her as an advance sat in an envelope on her dresser, $500 that would cover her overdue electricity bill with enough left over for Sophia's medication. Mom, can I have more cereal? Jaden asked, holding up his empty bowl. At 8 years old, he was already showing signs of his father's height, with an appetite to match. Sure, honey, Sarah replied, pouring another serving of the generic brand cereal. She watched her son eat, noticed the worn collar of his school shirt, the two short sleeves of his jacket. For so long, she'd been focused solely on survival, keeping a roof over their heads, food on the table, the lights on. The extras, even necessities like properly fitting clothes, had fallen by the wayside. "What time will you pick us up from Grandma's today?" Sophia asked, her voice small but curious. At 6, she was unusually perceptive, often sensing her mother's stress, even when Sarah tried to hide it. "Actually," Sarah said, making a spontaneous decision, "I thought we might do something different after school. How about we go get new shoes for both of you?" The children's eyes widened in surprise and delight. New things were rare in their household. Hand-me-downs and thrift store finds the norm. "Really?" Jaden exclaimed. "Can I get basketball shoes, like the ones we saw at the mall?" Sarah nodded, her heart warming at their excitement. "Yes, and then we need to go to a tire shop to get new tires for the car." "Is that why you were late yesterday?" Sophia asked, always observant. "Was something wrong with the car?" Sarah hesitated, unsure how much to share about yesterday's encounter. "The tires are very worn," she explained. "And yes, I stopped for gas, and I met someone who suggested I get them fixed." "Who?" Jaden asked around a mouthful of cereal. Sarah smiled. "You'll never believe it. It was Shaquille O'Neal." Jaden's spoon clattered against his bowl. "What? The Shaq? The real one? Mom, you're joking." "I'm not," Sarah laughed, enjoying their incredulity. "He was very kind and gave me the name of a tire shop where his friend works." "Did you get his autograph?" Jaden demanded, suddenly horrified at the missed opportunity. "Did you take a picture?" "No, honey, I didn't want to bother him." Sarah didn't add that she'd been too overwhelmed, too emotional in the moment to think about such things. "But he did mention something about a basketball camp this weekend that we might go to." Jaden looked like he might explode with excitement. "A real basketball camp? With Shaq?" He jumped up from his chair, nearly knocking over his milk. "Mom, this is the best thing ever." Sophia, quieter but equally excited, asked, "Can I come too? Even though I don't play basketball?" "Of course," Sarah assured her. "It'll be a family day." As she drove the children to school, Sarah felt a strange sense of possibility she hadn't experienced in years. One act of kindness from a stranger, a famous one, yes, but a stranger nonetheless, had created space for her to breathe, to think beyond the immediate crisis of the day. After dropping the kids off, Sarah called in to take a personal day from work, something she never did, even when sick. The receptionist at the dental office was surprised but supportive. "You've got so much vacation time saved up, Sarah. Take 2 days if you need them." Her first stop was Mike's tire shop. The small business was tucked between a laundromat and a convenience store, with a weathered sign and a lot full of cars waiting for service. Sarah parked and sat for a moment, gathering her courage. Pride had always been both her strength and her weakness. It kept her going through the hardest times, but also prevented her from accepting help when she needed it most. Inside, the shop smelled of rubber and motor oil. A bell jingled as she entered, and a burly man with graying hair looked up from behind the counter. "Be with you in just a sec," he called, finishing up with another customer. Sarah waited, fingering the business card in her pocket. When it was her turn, she approached the counter hesitantly. "I'm here about some tires," she began. "A friend recommended I come see Mike." "I'm Mike," the man replied with a friendly nod. "What can I help you with?" Sarah pulled out the card and slid it across the counter. "Shaquille O'Neal said you might be able to help me with a friends and family discount." Mike's eyebrows shot up as he read the note scrawled on the back of the card. His expression shifted from surprise to warm recognition. "Well, I'll be damned," he chuckled. "When Shaq sends someone, I pay attention." He looked up at Sarah with newfound respect. "He's been a customer for years, sends people my way sometimes." He studied her for a moment. "What kind of car are you driving?" "A 2010 Toyota Corolla," Sarah replied. "The tires are pretty bald." Mike nodded. "Let's take a look." Outside, he circled her car, crouching to examine each tire with expert eyes. His expression grew serious. "Ma'am, these aren't just worn, they're dangerous. This one's got a slow leak, and they're all worn beyond the legal limit. He looked up at her, his expression free from judgment. How long you been driving on these? Sarah sighed. Too long. I know they're bad, but... Mike stood, dusting off his hands. Say no more. I understand how it goes. He pulled out a small notepad and wrote something down. For a complete set of quality tires, mounted and balanced, it'd normally run about $600. He saw her wince and continued quickly. But for friends of Shaq, I have a special program. He tore off the paper and handed it to her. The total read $200. That's less than my cost, Sarah protested, recognizing the generous discount. Mike shrugged. Shaq sends me business regularly. Consider it an investment in customer loyalty. He smiled. Plus, I sleep better knowing there are safe tires on the road, especially with kids involved. Sarah wondered briefly if Shaq had somehow called ahead, explained her situation, but something in Mike's manner suggested this was simply how he operated, a small business owner who valued community and kindness over maximum profit. We can have you ready in about 2 hours, Mike added. There's a decent cafe next door if you want to wait. Sarah nodded gratefully. Thank you. This means more than you know. In the cafe, nursing a cup of coffee that she would have denied herself just yesterday, Sarah scrolled through her phone to the website for Shaq's basketball camp. The details were all there, dates, times, location, along with a note that volunteers were still needed. She registered both herself and Jaden, feeling a small thrill as she clicked Submit. As she waited, Sarah made a list, practical, methodical steps to address the most pressing needs her family faced. New shoes for the kids, renew Sophia's prescription, pay the electricity bill, start a small emergency fund with whatever remained. For the first time in months, she felt not just reactive, but proactive, planning beyond immediate survival. When her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, Sarah was surprised to see a message from Shaq's assistant, confirming her registration for the basketball camp and providing additional details about the volunteer position. The message ended with a personal note. Shaq mentioned your son loves basketball. We've reserved spots for both your children in the skills clinic. Looking forward to meeting you all. Sarah sat back, a wave of emotion washing over her. It wasn't just the financial help, though that was significant. It was the feeling of being remembered, of mattering enough for a follow-through. In a world where she'd grown accustomed to struggling alone, invisible to most, the simple act of being seen felt revolutionary. 2 hours later, Sarah drove away from Mike's tire shop on 4 new, safe tires, the car handling better than it had in years. As she headed to pick up her children from school, early for once, she made one more spontaneous decision. Today, they would stop for ice cream before shoe shopping. Today would be a day of small celebrations, of acknowledging that even in difficult circumstances, moments of joy were not just allowed but necessary. The ripples from one chance encounter at a gas station were already spreading outward, changing not just Sarah's immediate circumstances, but her perspective on what might be possible for her family's future. The week passed in a blur of small but significant changes for Sarah and her children. With new tires on the car, she no longer held her breath at every bump in the road, fearing a blowout. The electricity bill was paid ahead of the disconnection date, and Sophia's asthma medication sat ready in the bathroom cabinet. These practical improvements brought a sense of stability that had been missing for too long. But the most noticeable change was in Jaden. Since getting his new basketball shoes, proper athletic ones with ankle support and cushioning, he'd been practicing relentlessly in their apartment complex's small courtyard. Sarah would watch from the window as he dribbled and shot, often accompanied by Sophia, who cheered him on despite her limited understanding of the game. "Mom, do you think Shaq will remember us tomorrow?" Jaden asked Friday evening, as Sarah tucked him into bed. The basketball camp was scheduled for the following morning, and Jaden had talked of little else all week. "I'm not sure, honey," Sarah answered honestly. "He meets lots of people every day." "But he gave you his card," Jaden insisted, "and his assistant texted you. That means we're special, right?" Sarah smiled, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "We're definitely special, but Shaq is a very important person with many responsibilities. If he's too busy to talk to us, we shouldn't feel disappointed." Jaden nodded solemnly. "I understand, but I'm still going to show him my crossover move. I've been practicing. Down the hall in her room, Sophia was organizing her small backpack for tomorrow's event. Unlike her brother, she had little interest in basketball itself, but the prospect of a day out, a special day, had captivated her imagination. "Mommy, do you think there will be other kids like me who don't play basketball?" she asked when Sarah came to say goodnight. "I'm sure there will be," Sarah assured her, "and there will be other activities too, not just basketball." Sophia nodded, satisfied. "I packed my inhaler and my drawing notebook just in case." "That's very responsible," Sarah praised, kissing her daughter's forehead. Sophia had always been the more cautious child, perhaps because of her health challenges, where Jaden rushed headlong into experiences, Sophia observed carefully before participating. After both children were asleep, Sarah sat at their small kitchen table reviewing the information for tomorrow. The basketball camp would be held at a local community center from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. As a volunteer, she was expected to arrive by 8 to help with setup. Her station would be at the registration table, checking in participants and distributing t-shirts. The extra money from Shaq's advance had allowed her to take Saturday off from her weekend cleaning job, a rare luxury. Tomorrow would be entirely focused on her children, on this unexpected opportunity that had fallen into their laps. Morning came with the excited energy of Christmas Day. Both children were up before the alarm, already dressed in their carefully chosen outfits. Jaden wore his new basketball shoes with athletic shorts and a t-shirt featuring his favorite NBA team. Sophia had selected a comfortable dress with leggings, practical for sitting in bleachers, but still special enough for the occasion. "Remember," Sarah cautioned as they drove to the community center, "this day is about having fun and being grateful for the opportunity. No expectations beyond that." But as they pulled into the parking lot, Sarah's own heart quickened at the sight of news vans and a small crowd gathering outside the entrance. Banners announcing Shaq's Skills Camp hung from the building, and volunteers in matching t-shirts directed traffic and welcomed arrivals. At the staff entrance, Sarah gave her name to a coordinator who checked a list and then handed her a volunteer t-shirt and badge. "You're at registration table 3, the young woman explained. "The kids can go with Marcus over there. He's gathering the pre-registered participants for the first session." Sarah hesitated, reluctant to separate from Jaden and Sophia so quickly. The coordinator seemed to sense her concern. "Don't worry," she said kindly. "They'll be in the gym right through those doors. You can peek in whenever you have a break." After making sure both children had water bottles and knew where to find her, Sarah watched them join a growing group of excited kids. Jaden immediately began chatting with a boy his age, while Sophia stayed close to her brother, observing the scene with wide eyes. The registration desk kept Sarah busy for the next hour as families arrived in waves. She checked names, distributed camp t-shirts, and answered questions about the day's schedule. The work was straightforward but required attention, and she found herself enjoying the simple interactions with excited children and their parents. During a brief lull, Sarah slipped away to check on her children. Through the gymnasium doors, she could see hundreds of kids divided into age groups across the large space. Coaches moved between stations, demonstrating techniques and offering encouragement. And there, in the center court, unmistakable even from a distance, was Shaquille O'Neal himself. He moved with surprising grace for his size, demonstrating a perfect layup to a group of older children. Even from across the gym, his voice carried, encouraging, occasionally teasing, always engaging. Sarah scanned the groups until she spotted Jaden in a cluster of boys his age. Her son's face was alight with concentration and joy as he practiced dribbling drills. It took longer to locate Sophia, but Sarah finally spotted her daughter sitting on the sidelines with several other children. To her surprise, Sophia wasn't looking bored or left out. Instead, she was deeply engaged in conversation with a young woman who appeared to be an assistant coach. Both were smiling, and Sophia was gesturing animatedly, a rare sight for her normally reserved daughter. Reassured, Sarah returned to her post for another busy period of registrations. By mid-morning, the flow of arrivals had slowed to a trickle, and the coordinator stopped by to let her know she could take a break. "They're about to do the group photo and demonstration," the young woman mentioned. "You should go watch. It's always the highlight." In the gymnasium, parents and volunteers lined the walls, while the children sat in concentric semicircles around the main court. Sophia had somehow secured a front row spot and waved excitedly when she spotted her mother. Jaden was several rows back with his age group, too absorbed in the upcoming demonstration to notice Sarah's arrival. Shaq stood at center court with a microphone, his commanding presence naturally drawing all eyes. He spoke about the importance of teamwork, discipline, and education. Basketball skills, he emphasized, were valuable, but character and knowledge would take them further in life. As Sarah watched from the sidelines, she was struck by how easily he connected with the children, how he managed to make each group feel specially acknowledged. There was no hint of celebrity ego, just a genuine interest in encouraging young people. After the talk came a demonstration of skills, with Shaq and several coaches showing increasingly complex basketball moves that drew gasps and applause. When they called for volunteers to try the simpler techniques, Jaden's hand shot up immediately. Sarah held her breath as he was selected along with several other children. Pride swelled in her chest as she watched her son dribble confidently across the court, execute a passable crossover move, and make a layup, all under the guidance of his basketball hero. When Shaq gave him a fist bump and a word of praise, Jaden's face lit up with a joy Sarah hadn't seen since before his father's death. Later, during the lunch break, Sarah was helping distribute boxed meals when she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Shaq's assistant, a professional-looking woman with a tablet in hand. "Sarah Matthews?" the woman confirmed. "Shaq asked me to find you. He'd like to speak with you after the lunch period if you have a moment." Sarah nodded, surprised. "Of course." "Great. He'll be in the director's office at 1 o'clock. The assistant smiled warmly. "He remembered you right away when he saw your name on the volunteer list." As the assistant walked away, Sarah felt a curious mixture of emotions. Gratitude, certainly, but also a growing sense that this chance encounter was becoming something more significant than she had initially understood. At precisely 1 o'clock, Sarah stood outside the director's office, smoothing down her volunteer t-shirt nervously. Through the small window in the door, she could see Shaq sitting behind a desk, looking remarkably at ease despite his frame dwarfing the office furniture. He was on the phone, nodding occasionally, his expression serious but engaged. The assistant who had delivered the message earlier appeared at Sarah's side. "You can go right in," she said with an encouraging smile. "He's just finishing up a call." Sarah took a deep breath and opened the door. Shaq looked up, his serious expression immediately warming into a genuine smile. He held up one finger in a just a moment gesture as he concluded his call. "Yes, sir, I understand completely. We'll finalize the details next week," he said into the phone. "Thank you for your support of the foundation." He ended the call and set the phone down, then stood to greet Sarah, his impressive height even more apparent in the confined space. "Mrs. Matthews," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." "It's Ms.," Sarah corrected automatically, then blushed at her own boldness. "But Sarah is fine." Shaq nodded, registering the correction with respect. "Sarah, then, how are the new tires working out?" The simple question, his remembrance of such a specific detail, caught her off guard. "They're wonderful," she replied. "Mike was incredibly kind. I can't thank you enough for that recommendation." "Mike's good people," Shaq agreed, sitting back down and gesturing for her to take the chair opposite. "I've known him since my early days with the Magic. Always fair, always honest." For a moment, they sat in companionable silence, the sounds of the basketball camp continuing outside the office door. Sarah wondered why he had called her in. What more could possibly follow the kindness he had already shown? "Your son has real talent," Shaq said finally. "Good instincts on the court. And your daughter, one of my assistants mentioned she's quite the artist. She was drawing pictures of the drills during the morning session." Sarah smiled, maternal pride warming her face. "They're both amazing kids, resilient too. The past couple of years haven't been easy, but they rarely complain." Shaq nodded thoughtfully. "Kids are tougher than we give them credit for, but they shouldn't have to be tough all the time." He leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. "Sarah, I hope you don't mind, but after our meeting at the gas station, I asked my foundation team to look into something." Sarah tensed slightly, unsure where the conversation was heading. "We run several programs through my foundation," Shaq continued. One of them is specifically for single parents facing financial hardship. It provides support for education, sports activities, and basic needs. He pulled a folder from the desk and slid it toward her. Based on what you shared with me, I believe your family would qualify. Sarah stared at the folder but didn't reach for it. A complex wave of emotions, gratitude, pride, hesitation, washed over her. I appreciate the thought, she said carefully. But I've always managed on my own. I'm not looking for a handout. Shaq finished, his tone gentle but direct. That's not what this is. The parents in our program contribute what they can. Time, skills, community service. It's a partnership, not charity. He paused, seeming to choose his next words with care. You know, when I was growing up, my mother had too much pride to accept help sometimes. She worked so hard I barely saw her. One day, my basketball coach sat her down and told her something I never forgot. He leaned forward slightly. He said, letting others help isn't weakness. It's giving them the blessing of making a difference. The words resonated in a way Sarah hadn't expected, touching a truth she had long avoided. Her independence had been both shield and sword, protecting her from disappointment, but also cutting her off from community. The program is competitive, Shaq added, understanding her need for dignity. Not everyone who applies is accepted, but based on what I've seen of you and your children, I believe you would be an asset. He gestured to the folder again. Just take the information. Think about it. This time, Sarah reached for the folder, her fingers tracing the embossed foundation logo on its cover. Thank you, she said quietly. I will. Shaq nodded, then glanced at his watch. I should get back to the kids. We're doing the skills challenge this afternoon. He stood, and Sarah followed suit. Your son mentioned his father taught him his first basketball move. Sarah swallowed hard, memories surfacing unexpectedly. Yes, Marcus was an excellent player in high school. He loved teaching Jaden, even when he was barely tall enough to hold the ball. He passed away? Shaq asked, his question gentle, without presumption. 2 years ago. Construction accident. The words were familiar now, practiced, though the pain behind them remained fresh. He was a good man, the best father. Shaq nodded, respect evident in his expression. His son carries that legacy. You can see it in how he plays, joy mixed with discipline. He paused at the door. That comes from good parenting, Sarah. From you. The simple acknowledgement of her struggle, her effort, her success, despite overwhelming odds, broke through Sarah's carefully maintained composure. Tears welled in her eyes, but these weren't the desperate tears of the gas station. They came from a place of recognition, of being truly seen. I'm just doing my best, she managed. That's all any of us can do, Shaq replied with unexpected humility. But some people's best is extraordinary. He held the door open. I'm hosting a dinner for the volunteer staff after we wrap up today. Nothing fancy, just pizza and conversation. I'd be honored if you and your children would join us. Back in the gymnasium, the afternoon activities were in full swing. Sarah returned to her post, the folder tucked safely in her bag, her mind processing the unexpected conversation. As she helped distribute water bottles to thirsty participants, she caught glimpses of her children. Jaden fully engaged in the skills competition, Sophia now participating in a modified shooting drill with assistance from a patient coach. The joy on their faces was unmistakable. For a few hours, they were just kids having fun, unburdened by adult worries about bills and groceries and worn-out shoes. Sarah realized with sudden clarity that this moment of normal childhood happiness was exactly what she had been working so hard to provide. When the camp concluded with an awards ceremony, Sarah watched from the back of the gymnasium as each age group received recognition. Shaq made a point of saying something personal to each child as they received their certificate, taking time despite the large number of participants. To her surprise, Sophia was called forward for a special creativity award. Her sideline drawings of basketball techniques had impressed the coaching staff. The shy girl, who had been reluctant to attend, now beamed as she accepted a small trophy and a new set of art supplies. Moments later, Jaden's name was called as the winner of the skills competition for his age group. He practically bounded onto the stage, his new basketball shoes squeaking on the polished floor. Shaq presented him with a certificate and a basketball signed by several NBA players. The boy's face reflected pure, uncomplicated happiness, a rarity in recent years. As the families began to disperse, Sarah gathered with the other volunteers for final cleanup duties. The coordinator approached with a smile. "Your kids are wonderful," she said warmly. "Shaq mentioned you'll be joining us for the volunteer dinner?" Sarah nodded, still processing the day's events. "Yes, we've been invited." "Great, it's a nice tradition, gives everyone a chance to decompress after the excitement." The coordinator lowered her voice slightly. "Between us, Shaq often uses these dinners to identify people for the Foundation's programs. He has an eye for seeing potential where others might miss it." As Sarah helped stack the last of the chairs, she spotted her children sitting on the bleachers, Jaden spinning his new basketball on one finger, while Sophia showed him something in her drawing pad. They were animated, energized despite the long day. She thought about the folder in her bag, about Shaq's words regarding pride versus opportunity, about the unexpected doors that had opened from a chance encounter at a gas station less than a week ago. The future still held challenges. She was under no illusions about that, but for the first time in years, it also held new possibilities. When Jaden looked up and waved her over, eager to show off his trophy, Sarah felt a weight lifting. She had been carrying not just financial burdens, but the heavier load of isolation, of believing she had to handle everything alone. Perhaps the greatest gift from this unlikely friendship wasn't financial assistance, but the reminder that communities existed to support each other, that accepting help was not weakness, but wisdom. As she joined her children on the bleachers, listening to their excited recounting of the day's events, Sarah finally allowed herself to believe that the tears shed at the gas station might truly have marked a turning point, not just a momentary respite, but the beginning of a new chapter for her family. The volunteer dinner was held in a private room at a local restaurant just a few blocks from the community center. As Sarah pulled into the parking lot with Jaden and Sophia, she noticed there were only about 20 cars present. This was clearly a small, intimate gathering rather than a large event. "Do you think they'll have pepperoni pizza?" Jaden asked as they walked toward the entrance, his new basketball tucked securely under his arm. He hadn't let it out of his sight since receiving it. "I'm sure they will," Sarah assured him, adjusting Sophia's cardigan. The evening had turned cooler, and she hadn't thought to bring jackets in the morning rush. Inside, they were directed to a warmly lit room where several round tables were arranged. Most of the volunteers from the camp were already there, chatting in small groups, the atmosphere relaxed and friendly. Shaq hadn't arrived yet, but his assistant spotted Sarah and waved them over. "I'm so glad you could make it," she said, guiding them to a table near the center of the room. "Shaq will be here soon. He had a quick media interview after the camp. He specifically asked that you sit at his table." Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness at this special attention but managed a smile. "That's very kind. The kids are excited." "I bet they are," the assistant replied with a warm smile. "Jaden was the talk of the coaching staff today, and Sophia's drawings, absolutely charming. We've actually asked her permission to use some of them in our newsletter." Sophia, normally shy around strangers, beamed with pride. "Really? My drawings?" "Absolutely. You have a special talent for capturing movement on paper." The assistant knelt to Sophia's level. "Would that be okay with you?" Sophia nodded enthusiastically, clutching her art pad closer to her chest. "Yes, please." As they settled at their assigned table, servers brought out pitchers of drinks and platters of appetizers. Jaden immediately reached for a mozzarella stick, his energy undiminished despite the full day of activities. "Mom," he whispered urgently, "Shaq is coming." Sarah turned to see the basketball legend entering the room, his presence immediately commanding attention without any apparent effort on his part. He greeted people as he made his way through the space, taking time with each person, remembering names and details with impressive recall. When he reached their table, he rested a hand briefly on Jaden's shoulder. "MVP of the day right here," he said with genuine warmth. "That behind-the-back dribble is coming along nicely." Jaden practically glowed with the praise. "I've been practicing every day." Shaq turned to Sophia next. "And I hear you're our official camp artist. Those drawings are fantastic." Sophia, emboldened by the earlier praise from the assistant, opened her sketch pad. "Would you like to see them?" "Absolutely." Shaq replied, taking the seat next to her. He spent several minutes looking through her drawings, commenting thoughtfully on each one. It wasn't perfunctory attention. He genuinely engaged with her work, asking questions about her techniques and inspiration. Sarah watched this interaction with a swelling heart. So many celebrities might give superficial attention to children, but Shaq's interest was authentic and unhurried. He treated both her children with the same respect he would give to adults, validating their passions and perspectives. The dinner itself was casual and lively. Pizza, salads, and desserts served family style at each table. Shaq made sure everyone felt included in the conversation, asking about volunteers' backgrounds and connections to basketball. When Sarah's turn came, she spoke briefly about her children's enthusiasm for the sport, carefully avoiding mention of their financial struggles or her personal story. But Shaq, with surprising perceptiveness, found ways to acknowledge her journey without exposing her vulnerability to the group. "Sarah here reminds me of my own mother," he said at one point. "Same strength, same dedication to her kids. People like that make all the difference in a child's life." The simple comment brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. Recognition of her efforts, the countless nights of worry, the multiple jobs, the sacrifices large and small, was rare. Most days, she felt invisible, just another struggling parent in a world too busy to notice. After the meal, as people began to mingle between tables, Shaq motioned Sarah aside. "Have you had a chance to look through the folder?" Sarah nodded. "I did, briefly. It's an amazing program." "But you're hesitating?" Shaq observed, his perception once again catching her off guard. "I've always managed on my own," Sarah admitted. "Taking help feels like failure?" Shaq suggested gently. "It's not. Think of it as a teammate passing you the ball. In basketball, refusing to take passes doesn't make you strong. It makes you a poor player." The analogy landed with surprising impact. Sarah had never considered that her fierce independence might actually be limiting her effectiveness as a parent. "The foundation isn't just about financial assistance," Shaq continued. "There's mentoring, educational support, career development for parents." He paused, watching Jaden and Sophia chatting animatedly with other children across the room. "They're great kids. Imagine what they could accomplish with a few more resources, a few more opportunities." Sarah followed his gaze, allowing herself to envision it. Jaden with proper coaching for his basketball talent. Sophia with art lessons to develop her creative eye, both children freed from the shadow of financial insecurity that had colored their lives since their father's death. "I've included my personal contact information in that folder," Shaq added. "Not my assistant's, mine. If you decide to apply, or if you need anything else, call me directly." He met her eyes with sincerity. "I mean that." Before Sarah could respond, Jaden rushed over, excitement radiating from him. "Mom, Coach Marcus says there's a youth basketball league starting next month, and he thinks I should join." He turned to Shaq. "It's at the same community center. Would that be okay?" Shaq laughed. "More than okay. I'll come watch a game when I'm in town." As they prepared to leave, Shaq's assistant approached with 3 small gift bags. "Just some souvenirs from the camp," she explained, handing them to Sarah. "We give them to all our special volunteers." In the car on the way home, both children eagerly explored their bags, pulling out t-shirts, water bottles, and small basketball-themed gifts. Sarah waited until they were distracted before peeking into her own bag. Inside, she found not only the standard items, but also an envelope. At a red light, she carefully opened it to find a handwritten note from Shaq. "Sarah, your strength reminds me of my mother's. The hardest thing she ever did was accept help when we needed it. The best thing she ever did was show me that true strength lies in community, not isolation. Your children are lucky to have you. My foundation would be honored to have your family join our programs. The application is just a formality. Consider this your official invitation. Shaq." Beneath the note was a check with an amount that made Sarah gasp quietly, enough to cover 3 months of rent with money left over. In the memo line, Shaq had written simply, "Investment in potential." By the time they arrived home, both children were fighting to stay awake, the excitement of the day finally catching up with them. As Sarah helped them get ready for bed, she noticed subtle changes in both their demeanors. A new confidence, a sense of possibility that hadn't been there before. "Mom," Jaden said as she tucked him in, his new basketball placed carefully on the nightstand beside him. "Today was the best day ever." "It really was, wasn't it?" Sarah agreed, smoothing his hair. "Shaq said I could be really good if I practice every day," Jaden continued, his voice slowing with approaching sleep. "He said discipline matters more than talent." "He's right about that," Sarah said. "It's true for everything in life." "Even for grown-ups?" Jaden asked, his eyes already closing. "Especially for grown-ups," Sarah replied softly. In Sophia's room, her daughter was carefully arranging her art supplies and the drawing pad on her small desk. "Mommy, can I take art classes someday?" she asked. "The lady said there are Saturday classes at the community center." "I think we might be able to arrange that," Sarah said, a new certainty in her voice. "Would you like that?" Sophia nodded, her expression serious. "I want to get better," Shaq said. "Practice makes progress." "Progress, not perfect," Sarah corrected gently, recalling his exact words from the skills demonstration. "And he's right." After both children were asleep, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with the foundation folder open before her and the check resting beside it. For so long, she had defined strength as independence, as bearing every burden alone. But perhaps true strength lay in recognizing when to accept a helping hand, when to allow others the joy of making a difference. The gas station tears that had caught Shaq's attention hadn't been just about financial struggle. They had been about isolation, about the exhaustion of carrying heavy burdens without support. In less than a week, that chance encounter had evolved into something that felt like the beginning of a new chapter. Not a handout, but a partnership. Sarah picked up her phone and, before doubt could creep in, sent a text to the number Shaq had provided. "We would be honored to join the foundation program. Thank you for seeing us." The response came almost immediately. "The honor is mine. This is just the beginning." As Sarah prepared for bed that night, she noticed her reflection in the bathroom mirror looked different, less strained, more hopeful. The woman looking back at her wasn't just surviving anymore. She was beginning to envision a future beyond mere existence. One chance encounter, one moment of being truly seen, had created ripples that would continue long after the initial splash. 6 months transformed Sarah and her children's lives in ways they never imagined. The Shaquille O'Neal Foundation provided not just financial support, but a comprehensive network that changed their daily reality. Jaden flourished in the youth basketball league, his natural talent blooming under consistent coaching. His grades improved thanks to the foundation's tutoring program and the newfound stability at home. The anxious boy of 6 months ago had become a confident 10-year-old with clear goals and boundless enthusiasm. Sophia's transformation was equally remarkable. Weekly art classes at the community center became her passion, her creativity finding expression through various mediums. Her asthma was better managed with regular checkups and proper medication. The shy little girl now proudly displayed her artwork at local exhibitions organized by the foundation. For Sarah, the most significant change came in her career path. Through the foundation's educational assistance, she enrolled in evening classes to become a dental hygienist. Her employer supported the transition with flexible hours and the promise of a position upon certification completion. The foundation's safety net allowed her to quit her night cleaning job, giving her precious time with her children and energy to pursue her education. On this particular Friday, Sarah left work early to pick up the children. They'd been invited to the grand opening of a new recreational center sponsored by Shaq's foundation in an underserved neighborhood, much like their own. "Do you think Shaq will remember us?" Jaden asked from the back seat. Sarah smiled. "I'm sure he will." "He texted you yesterday," Sophia pointed out pragmatically. "He specifically invited us." In the months since their first meeting, Shaq had maintained surprising consistency in his contact. Occasional check-ins, congratulatory texts when Jaden's team won, or when Sophia's artwork featured in the foundation newsletter. He'd even attended one of Jaden's games as promised. The new center occupied a formerly abandoned building, now transformed into a vibrant hub with a gymnasium, art studios, computer labs, tutoring rooms, and a cafeteria. Inside, Sarah recognized many familiar faces, families from foundation programs, coaches, community leaders. Near the gymnasium, Shaq spotted them despite being surrounded by officials and reporters. He made his way over, high-fived Jaden, admired Sophia's new glasses, and turned to Sarah. "You're looking well. How are the classes going?" "Really good," Sarah replied. "I'm halfway through the program now." "Excellent," Shaq nodded. "There's someone I'd like you to meet." He gestured toward a middle-aged woman who looked vaguely familiar. As the woman approached, recognition dawned on Sarah, the cashier from the gas station who had witnessed her moment of despair. "We've actually met before," Patricia said warmly, "though I don't know if you remember." "I do," Sarah replied, emotion coloring her voice. "You were very kind that night." Patricia explained she would be managing the center's new single-parent support program. "It was actually inspired partly by your story," she told Sarah. Shaq mentioned how one moment of connection changed multiple lives. Near the entrance, Sarah noticed a wall covered with photographs of children and families engaged in various activities. In the center was a framed quote, "Every act of kindness has the potential to change a life. Sometimes all it takes is truly seeing someone in their moment of need." Below was a small plaque, inspired by a chance encounter at a gas station that reminded us of our common humanity. During the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Shaq surprised Sarah by announcing her as the newest foundation team member. Once she completes her certification program, Sarah will be providing dental hygiene services here at the center, helping us launch a new health initiative for underserved families. It was the first Sarah had heard of this opportunity, and she felt a rush of emotion, gratitude, excitement, purpose. This wasn't charity. It was a chance to give back, to complete the circle by helping others as she had been helped. As applause filled the room, Sarah stood tall with her children beaming beside her. The tears in her eyes now were not of desperation, but of fulfillment. From a moment of despair at a gas station to this point of promise and potential. It was a powerful reminder that sometimes the darkest moments could lead to unexpected light, that vulnerability could become strength, and that a single act of kindness, offered with respect and sincerity, could indeed change lives in ways that rippled outward beyond imagining. If this story of unexpected kindness moved you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss our everyday stories of life-changing encounters. Your comments inspire us. Share a time when a small act of kindness made a big difference in your life or someone else's. Every story shared creates ripples of compassion in our community. For more content that celebrates the power of human connection, check out our playlist Stories, linked in the description below. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most meaningful changes begin with simply seeing someone in their moment of need.